Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakdash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to do a continuation of being profitable and some more examples of men of our forefathers who exemplified essentially being in a profitable spirit, right? So for today, I want to go through our forefather Mordecai, right? In the book of Esther, right? So I want to do a little bit of recap. So this is the word profitable in the etymology, right? So yesterday we covered Joseph, and today I wanted to go through Mordecai, right? So profitable in the etymology, what does that mean? It says yielding spiritual and moral benefit, useful. It says advantageous, expedient, helpful, money making, right? So keep that in mind. Spiritual and moral benefit. These people exemplified being a moral benefit or a spiritual benefit. As in yesterday, when you go through the example with Joseph, he exemplified having a spiritual and also actually a moral benefit, right? When you go through his story, right? Because he was going through a temptation with the Pharaoh's wife, tried to make moves on him, but he maintained his integrity by not laying with her, right? But continuing on, it says profit in the etymology here. It says income derived from an office, property, or transaction, benefit, spiritual benefit, advantage, profit, gain, from the Latin profectus, growth, advance, increase, success, progress, right? Accomplish, make progress, be useful, do good, right? So now we're going to see a little bit of how Mordecai was profitable during his in the midst of captivity, right? So we're going to go through the book of Esther, jump around here and there, and Lord's will is always this lesson will be edifying, right? So this is Esther chapter 2, verse 20, and it says verse 21, and it says, in those days while Mordecai sat at the king's gate, and the king that was reigning at this time, his name was Ahasuerus, which I believe he's also known as Xerxes, right? When you look in other translations, right? So it says, in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, it says, two of the king's chamberlains, Bagthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus, right? So let's get a definition of chamberlain. Actually, don't know what that is, just to get some more edification on that. So it says a chamberlain is a person who manages a chamber or chambers, right? So it says by the time the word reached English, it had been applied to specifically to important royal officers of various duties, such as one who attends a king or person or higher rank in his or her private chamber, right? So I'm guessing this person would be like, I don't want to say like an overseer, but somebody who kind of, is essentially they're kind of like in close proximity to the king, right? And managing, the I guess the logistics of these royal affairs, right? So they're very in close proximity to the king, just to get an understanding of what these people did back then, right? The king would probably have a very busy itinerary, attending councils and so on and so forth. So it says here, the keeper of a treasure chamber. It says a steward, a treasurer. It says a chamber, a chief financial officer of the king's household, right? And that's very interesting. It seems so. I guess in today's layman's terms, it's kind of like how in like some businesses they might have, for example, not the president, but a president, an owner, and then that owner would have certain chief executive officers, right? They would have financial officers. I'd have, you know, accountant officers, and you have financial, all these different various different groups of people who manages different departments. So think of it in a sense kind of like that, right? So somebody who manages the chamber or the chambers, right? So just to get some understanding of what was being said here, right? So this is verse 22, and it says, "And the thing was known to Mordecai, um, who told unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out, and therefore they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king," right? So what we're going to do to kind of touch more on Mordecai, we're kind of going to jump through to the sixth chapter, right? It is a very interesting book. There is a bit of tension that occurs between our people and essentially Haman, and essentially it there is a Mordecai eventually, he didn't bow down to Haman, you know right? And essentially he puts forth, he tries to persecute our people, Haman, right? So put hell upon our people, right? So this is Esther. I'm going to jump to the sixth chapter, verse 1, and it says, "On that night could not the king sleep, and commanded to bring the book of the record of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king." And it says, "And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, the two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, There was nothing done for him." So right, so you know, the king is hearing this, what's it called? He's hearing of this good work, this good deed. Kind of like how Shai said, a tree is known by its fruits. When you go into that word fruits, it represents karpos. I mean, that's what it means in the Greek. I'm sorry. The word there is karpos, meaning a work, a deed, right? Character, right? This is what Mordecai did, and the king is like, "Well, what's going on? What happened? What happened? Was he, treated for this? Was he, given some kind of what's it called? Like how somebody might, you might get a good you might get recognized at work, things like that nature, right? So he's wondering, okay, was anything, good done for him? And the king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman was come into outward court of the king's house, and to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows, that he appeared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, Behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to himself? And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, the horse that the king rideth upon, the crown royal which is set upon his head, and let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's the most noble princes, and they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, to proclaim before him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then said the then the king said to Haman, jumping down, take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Right. So all this apparel, the not the Lord. I'm sorry, the king here, delighteth to honor Mordecai. So he wanted to give him, a nice fancy horseback, to deck him out, wanted him to give him that. He wanted him to give Mordecai that special treatment because of what Mordecai did. Because Mordecai was essentially, he was profitable in the role that he conducted himself in. He wasn't just a low level regular Pookie and Ray Ray. He was somebody who actually conducted himself has morals, and this is the way us as Israelites, we are created to be. When you look at the landscape and the nature of how our people behave today, as people that are completely uncultured because they follow templates going back to these different rappers, singers, actors, sports players that our people follow. They don't have righteous examples of how to follow and conduct themselves as people who are civilized, people who are honorable, noble princes, noble princesses, right? Let me get that word noble here. Noble in the etymology. So it says illustrious, distinguished, of high rank or birth. It says noble bearing or birth, nobilis in the Latin, meaning well known, renowned, excellent, superior. And the Lord created us to be superior, right? Let me go to 1 second. Let me get this one here. This is Deuteronomy 7, verse 6, and it says, for thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy power. The Lord thy power hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people upon the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because ye were more in number than any people, for ye were the fewest of all people, but because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn unto your fathers, that the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen, from the hand of Pharaoh the king of Egypt. Right? So the Lord, we are a holy people. We are a separate people. And this is the way Mordecai exemplified himself amongst his peers, amongst the king. And you saw how all that favor, you saw how that dignity and honor, he was shining bright, in the spirit. There were people that were drawn into him because of this, right? Okay, let me go down. There's just a couple more verses here. Okay, let me read. This is Esther chapter 6, verse 10. And it says, then the king said to Haman, make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, even do even, so to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai. So just like how Joseph was arrayed, because he was able to give an interpretation, of the Pharaoh's dream. He actually even conducted himself, by having an upright manner, by not laying with the Pharaoh's wife. Joseph remaining blameless, right? Mordecai exemplified his conduct, that spiritual, he had spiritual substance, going back into the word profitable. Let me get it again. It says spiritual and moral benefit. He was useful, in these situations, right? He exemplified, usefulness. He exemplified conduct, etiquette, right? So it says, brought forth. I'm sorry. This is verse 11, and it said, then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighted to honor. Right? So the king delighted, and he was very, very drawn to Mordecai because of Mordecai's conduct and his behavior. And this is what wisdom does to a man. It makes his, not just his face to shine, right? But it makes people drawn to you. But just like how you see on the flip side with Haman now, this is another flip side, because it shows you, how what light does. You can have people who are very, very drawn to the light, and then you have people who are they scoff at the light, because you see in the wicked devices that Haman had. He wanted to essentially get Mordecai to be executed, right? And then that plot, that wicked device that he was trying to do, it fell upon his own head. When you go deeper into the story, but that's neither here or there. The point is that two things can happen when somebody is when you have that light. People are either drawn to it, people are either drawn to you, or people are, they kind of scoff at it, and because they're essentially, their deeds are evil, right? Let me go to okay, this is Titus chapter 3, verse 1, and I'll read down to verse 3, and it says, put them into mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness unto all men. For ourselves also were sometimes foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving diverse lusts and pleasures, living in malice, envy, hateful, and hating one another. Right? So we a lot of us live this, these particular ways, in the world, and essentially, having this understanding now, we live as people, as essentially upright, individuals, is how we're supposed to live, right? Because when you look at the way a lot of our, especially a lot of our young people, they live as beasts, they live as degenerates, they live as people, they suffer as evildoers. They're idle, they're wicked, they're plotting against, having an evil mind towards their own neighbors. They don't have a mindset to actually exemplify righteousness and upright conversation and conduct, right? What actually comes with proper etiquette as being a noble. And this is how you see the way how Mordecai exemplified himself in captivity. He exemplified himself as somebody who was profitable to the king, where the king actually gave him reverence, honor, and respect because, he had respect for Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, right? So, that's pretty much it. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but this is just going into an example of how Mordecai exemplified that moral benefit and usefulness. Very, very helpful. He was profitable in the situation that he was in, right? So, anyways, I'll leave it there, but Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. I just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Makakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth. Until next time, I say Shalom.